Hi, welcome back to Christine's Home Affairs. We have another viewer request today, and this time it is going to be a tissue box holder. Today I'm going to show you how to draft a pattern to make your own tissue box holder. You'll be able to use those techniques in a rectangular box like this one, or if you had a square tissue box. Come along and I'll show you how to draft your pattern and then make up a tissue box holder. And I think we'll also make it reversible as well, just for something a little bit more interesting. The first thing you're going to need is your tissue box, and then we need some paper big enough to determine how much paper you'll need and fabric. You basically just need to wrap a tape measure around the longest point, and that is 62 centimetres or just over 24 inches, but then I need to allow extra for seam allowances, so I would just go halfway up the box again, and that's plenty for the seam allowance. And then you'll do the same on the other side. Make sure that you've got enough to cover your box plus the seam allowance. My seam allowance today is 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. So I folded my paper in half twice just to find the centre. So centre your box over your paper and we can start marking around the box. I'll be using a thick black marker today so that you can see the lines I've drawn. So that is the outside perimeter of our box. We need to add a little bit of room for ease so that you can slip your cover over the box nice and easily. And because we're going to be padding this, we want to make it more comfortable to get the cover over the top. So we're going to draw a line about 6 millimetres or 1/4 of an inch around the outside of that. This is the size of the fabric that we need to sit over the top of the box. What we're now going to have is our inner layer of fabric, our fleecy on the inside, and then our outer fabric as well. It'll mean you have a nice smooth glide up and down your box. Next, we want to measure the height of our box. That is, for me, it is almost 10 centimetres. So I will measure almost 10 centimetres from that outside line that I've drawn. And we're going to do that on all sides. So I can extend this outer line to that 10 centimetre mark. Close up the end. Repeat for the other side. And we'll do the same going out on the side. So I've made a few marks on the long side of the box, and again from this outside line we're going to come out 10 centimetres or the height of your box. Okay, so this is the finished size of our box with our sides included, but we need to add seam allowance. I'm going to have a 1 centimetre seam allowance. And I'm going to mark that all the way around the entire box pattern. All right, this is the finished pattern for our tissue box so far. We need to also allow an opening in the centre to bring the tissues through. So what you can do now, all tissue boxes are different, whether you have a rectangular opening or a curved opening like this one. We'll take out the top opening cover there, and we're going to use that as our template for the top of our tissue box holder. So I've marked the centre across here and across the narrow side as well. When I folded this earlier, I left a crease in the paper. So that's easy enough for me to mark, and I'll line this up in the centre of those markings. Once you've centred your little template, you can trace around that. All right, what we're going to do now is cut this out on the dotted lines. And there's our tissue box pattern. You can test your pattern out now by folding it on all of those lines that we've marked. I'm going to cut into the corner of my pattern now, just so that I can test this out. And place that over the top. And we can now see that with these edges all folded up and stitched together, we've got a little bit of wiggle room in there, which will allow plenty of space for our fleecy and our 2 layers of fabric. And that's our seam allowance. The bottom is going to be kept open. We'll be putting some elastic in there to keep it secure. Okay, so there is our finished pattern. We can now trace this out onto our fusible fleece. So what I've got here is just a lightweight fusible fleece. We don't want anything too heavy. This is like a palin or a parlan. For my tissue box, I've got 44 by 33 centimetres of stabiliser, or 17 1/4 by 13 inches. We just need 1 piece of that. For the fabric, we need 2 pieces. They are 46 by 36 centimetres or 18 by 14 inches. Keep in mind, these are the measurements for the box that I've measured. Yours may vary. And the only other thing we need is a little bit of elastic. So about a 1/4 inch 6mm elastic. It really doesn't matter. And you only need a couple of bits of elastic that are just a bit longer than the width of the box. So that's about 10 inches or 25 centimetres. We'll cut that to size later. When we drew this pattern out, we've marked it with the seam allowance added in. We don't want the seam allowance on our fusible product because we want the fabric to overhang that. So this outside edge here is the fabric, whereas the inside edge is our fusible. So we'll just go and trim off all of these seam allowances on here because we don't need that. That was just to show you how everything was going to work together. So with the seam allowances, our pattern looks like this. Without them, this is our pattern for our fusible interfacing or stabiliser. So this is all we need now. Position that onto your fusible fleece and then cut it to the size of your template. After you've cut out your little template onto the fusible, grab one of your pieces of fabric and place it on the wrong side of your fabric, making sure that you've got enough room for a seam allowance all the way around. Then we'll go and fuse this onto our fabric. Okay, so that's been fused onto one piece of your fabric. Grab the other piece, place that right side up, and we'll lay this one out directly over the top. And make sure that you've got enough seam allowance underneath on that bottom piece of fabric as well. Then what we can do is cut out our seam allowance beside the edge of the fleecy. So the edge of the fleecy becomes our stitching line. So my ruler has a 1 centimetre line on it. I can just place that line on the edge of the fleecy there. And cut that out. And I'll repeat that all the way around, making sure that I remember to allow that 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. Oh, okay, so I nearly mucked it up. Lucky I stopped just in time. That was close. So once you've got both layers of fabric cut out with your fleecy attached to it, pin this together really well because we don't want this shifting at this stage. And once you've done that, flip it over. I want to work on the side of the fabric that has the lightest colour on it because I'm going to draw on it. You can cut out this little section on the pattern and place that over the top, or you can just take your template and place that right in the middle. So let's find the centre from both directions. So these are my fold lines along here. Take your template or your cutout, place that directly over the top, line up your template, and when you're happy with the position of it, trace around it. And this will become your stitching line around here. I'm going to take this to the machine and sew all the way around here, come back around, then we'll be able to trim this close to the inside edge, flip it through. Needle size I'm using is a number 80 or size 12, and I'm going to be using a smaller stitch length on this one, and that is a 2.6. So it doesn't really matter where you start, but you want to be stitching on the line all the way around. Alright, so this has been sewn together right around. We're going to cut out the centre around about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimetre from the stitching line. So this inside line here will be my cutting line. And we can remove these pins now. Fold the fabric in half and make a cut. And then you can cut through both layers of fabric and the fleecy, following that inner line that we've marked. Okay, so we've got all the layers secured. What we need to do now is clip all the curves all the way around, and that will help this piece of fabric when we turn it the other way around to sit a lot nicer on the curve. So you don't want to clip past the stitching line. Once all the edges are clipped on the inside there, we're going to turn the fabric through to the other side so that we have the lining on one side and the main on the outer. Before I do that, I'm just going to go with the iron and push that seam away from the lower fabric, and what that'll do is help the fabric to push under. And when you have inner curves like this, there might be a little bit more resistance, so you might want to put a couple of more snips in there just to help relax that a little bit more. And when you're happy with that, turn the fabric through to the other side, just bring it through the hole. Then you just want to shape the fabric to match this template that we have here. And we can go and top stitch. Before we do that, we want to see how it's going to look on our tissue box. That's your shape cut out there. It's not perfect, but I can live with that. Let's go top stitch. I've increased my stitch length to 3 for the top stitching. The top stitching has been done around the top edge of our tissue box opening. What we need to do now is sew up the side seams. Sewing up the side seams will be really easy on the stabilised fabric because we can just follow the outer edge of the fleecy. But if you feel you need to mark a seam allowance, I think I'd like to have my seam allowance marked in. It does make it a little bit easier sometimes. So with the layer of fabric that's got the fleecy on it, that's going to be easy to do, because all we need to do is where the corner is here, is pinch those edges together, line up your fabric and pin that together, and you'll sew right across that edge of the fleecy or the stabilizer. On your lining fabric, it's a little bit more difficult unless you know exactly where your seam allowance measurement is on your sewing machine. So what I've done is I've marked my 1 centimetre or 3/8 inch seam allowance right around the entire piece of fabric. So then what I can do is pinch that fabric, pinch that corner together there, pop a pin in right on that line, check that it goes through to the other side and that it lines up with the line that you've got marked. And we're going to sew right across that mark we've made. Now we're only going to do that on the side seams, we're not doing it on the outer edges. So bring all of your corners together separately. So we want the lining and the main to be separate from each other. So all the corners are done on the one side of the fabric, and then we'll repeat that for the stabilized piece. So again, we just grab the fleecy corner, line up the side edges, the bottom edges, and that should automatically line up your stabilizer. Okay, so we have the corners sorted on both sides. Let's take this back to the machine and sew up those side seams. All we need to do now is start from the bottom edge, sew all the way up to the point here. Make sure you backstitch there as well. I am starting at the outside edge and I'm just going to sew all the way up, but I've changed my stitch length to 2.6 again. When I get to the top corner here, I just want to have some smaller stitches so that the end points don't become unravelled. Backstitch here, and then we'll go on to the next one. When you do, just make sure that you have any fabric sitting behind it well out of the way, otherwise you'll accidentally stitch those layers. Okay, so that's one side done, and now I just need to do the other one that doesn't have any fusible on it. And I'm just going to follow the marked lines. Okay, so the corners are done now on both sides of the tissue box cover, and where we have our fold in the fabric just up the top here, you can either just clip in to separate the layers of the fabric here, or you can trim close to the corner. And we'll do the same on the other side. And what will happen now is that your corners will poke out nicely, and then you'll have the beginning of the shape of your tissue box holder. Before we do that, we're going to fold up the seam allowance and give it a bit of a press as well, just so that everything sits evenly. You can open your seam allowances here. So we'll fold over the seam allowance on both pieces of fabric there and press it. All right, so I have folded over the edges and just given it a bit of a press. When you iron this side with the fusible on it, you want to be a little bit more careful letting the iron go onto the fusible side. This stuff being synthetic will end up fusing to your iron and it'll cause it to start smoking. You might wonder how I know this. I did just have my iron start smoking and I ran out to Chris because I thought I was going to blow something up. Okay, so let's put the fabric together. Doesn't matter which way because this is going to be reversible. Poke your corners into one another, and that's starting to look pretty good like that, isn't it? Let's get our box and have a look. Try and keep the layers together. I like that. So what we've got here underneath is the two layers of fabric with our edges folded under, and you want to try and line those up from the corner seams, and we'll line up all four corners, and then we can line up the rest of the fabric. We don't need the box. Once you've got your edges clipped, I've left an opening on the long sides, so these are the long edges here, and I've left an opening somewhere close to the seam edge on both long sides, and that's so that we can put the elastic in. So what we need is 2 pieces of elastic, and you just want to place the elastic over the top of the box and cut that off the size of the box there, and then that'll stretch over with our seam allowance. So if you want to, you can make it just a smidge longer. So I've cut 2 of them, and if you want my measurements, they were 12 centimetres or 4 3/4 inches. So 2 pieces of elastic. If you find the edge of your seam here, we're going to measure 2.5 centimetres or 1 inch and insert the elastic just inside there, and you want to insert that about the length of your seam allowance, and I'll clip that in place. And then on this side we'll do the same thing, so we want the elastic coming across, and on the other side we'll do the same. And you can just mark a line at your seam allowance on the edge of your elastic, and then you can watch that glide in and fix it in place. Okay, now we can take this to the machine, and we're going to top stitch all the way around the folded edges, making sure that you secure all of the layers. When we get to the area where the elastic is, we'll go forward, back and forward again, just to reinforce that section. So I'm going to start where the elastic is, and I'll put the elastic behind my foot. It'll be easier to maneuver if it starts off out of my way. And I'll start my top stitch right on the elastic, so I'll go forward, back and forward. When you come up to the next piece of elastic, well, mine fell out, so I might just grab that piece and insert that where it was supposed to go. That piece of elastic, I'll just pop that back in again. So this elastic is just going to be sitting in the way now as we go around. Okay, so the elastic's annoying. I'm just going to end my work here, move that back, and then keep on going. Sometimes I'm too lazy for my own good. So I'll take that elastic to the back of the machine again, and then just start sewing again. So we're coming up to the beginning again. Keep the elastic forward. And we're done. Okay, now that our tissue box is finished, we can fit it over our box. Place your fabric directly over the top. Just move the elastic out of the way. slide that over the top, and underneath you can just fit that elastic in place. And there we have our tissue box holder, and it completely covers the sides of your tissue box. And as I said, it's reversible, so we can turn it the other way around. If you get sick of the colours on one side, you can change it up. It is reversible, but if you have a shape like what I've got on the top of the box here, this one here, it's actually not the same when you turn the fabric around the other way. So on this side here, it's going in the opposite direction. But look, at the end of the day, it's really not going to be a problem. It'll still look good. If you have one of those tissue boxes that have square cutouts, it'll be much easier. You won't have to worry about perfect shapes. It's perfectly usable either way, but obviously this side of the box is a little bit better. But I'm happy with that. I hope you guys are too. I wasn't sure how this was going to turn out, but I'm pretty happy with how it has. Even though the swirly design on the top isn't quite perfect, I can live with that. I don't think anybody's ever going to notice it, and I think it just adds a nice little feature to the top of the box. So very simple to make, very easy to fit over your tissue box, and sits securely in place with that little bit of elastic underneath. I hope you've enjoyed learning how to draft the pattern for it as well. And if you do make them, share the photos up on our Facebook group, which is called Christine's Home Affairs. I do love to see everybody's projects. I especially love it when I release a video and the next day somebody's already made the project that I've shown. Do share them on our group if you like. If you don't have Facebook, you can always email me photos and I can share them in the community tab up here. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and I shall catch you next time. Bye for now.